Entries cost £2 or post your name and number to GB07 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrants must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 30th of August. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Your lunchtime update on the stories that matter across the UK.
From breaking news and insightful analysis, inspiring stories and lively debates. Are you comparing yourself to a former Prime Minister?
Which is it?
Stay informed, stay updated, stay entertained.
I just don't know how anyone would not want to be there.
Every weekday from midday.
We are Good Afternoon Britain, only on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Tune in to Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. GB News royalty with your perfect start to the weekend. Lucky us! Feisty and fearless guests.
Well, I'm a normal person, so ask me.
Honest opinions that raises more questions than a Gary Barlow tax return. And a few surprises along the way. Might be cold in this studio. That is Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. 8 to 9 only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry. Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on State of the Nation tonight. Yesterday marked the moment the Democratic establishment admitted it had been lying to the people of the United States and the world. Joe Biden is not fit for office and so has fallen out of the presidential race. Tens of thousands of travellers have had their plans disrupted owing to an IT meltdown, but new evidence may have suggested EU interference in the cause of the chaos. The university Ponzi scheme is on the brink of collapse, but will a taxpayer be forced to bail out Britain's woke social justice departments? Plus, yet another attack on British history has unfolded as the Royal Parks has branded the Albert Memorial offensive because of the supposed racist legacy of the empire. State of the Nation starts now. I'll also be joined by my panel, former Conservative MP Philip Davis and the author and broadcaster Amy Nicole-Turner. As ever, I want to hear from you. Please let me know your views, mailmog@gbnews.com. But now, it's your favourite part of the day, the News Bulletin with Polly Middlehurst.
Jacob, thank you, and good evening to you. Well, the top story from the GB Newsroom tonight is that the head of the US Secret Service has admitted today that the attempt to assassinate Donald Trump was the most significant operational US Secret Service failure for decades. Kimberly Cheetle has been testifying today before a congressional committee. She's been trying to explain herself following the attempt to kill Donald Trump last week. She was being questioned about the security lapses that allowed a lone rifleman to successfully take aim at Mr. Trump, saying that she took full responsibility for what went wrong.
The assassination attempt of former President Donald Trump on July 13th is the most significant operational failure of the Secret Service in decades, and I am keeping him and his family in my thoughts. The Secret Service's solemn mission is to protect our nation's leaders. On July 13th, we failed.
Kimberly Cheetle speaking there. Meanwhile, financial donations to the US Democrat Party have surged after President Biden's announcement that he's stepping down from the US presidential race. In an online statement yesterday, Joe Biden endorsed his VP, his Vice President, Kamala Harris, as his favourite candidate for president. But the same endorsement was missing from the former president, Obama. It comes after he faced increasing calls to step aside since his poor debate performance against Donald Trump last month. Here, though, the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, praised Joe Biden.
A man who, during 5 decades of service, never lost touch with the concerns of working people and always put his country first. A true friend of the Labour movement, his presidency will leave a legacy that extends far beyond America to freedom and security on this continent.
Now, the Prime Minister's also been setting out plans today to cut our reliance on foreign workers by improving skills training in England. It's called Skills England. It was a manifesto pledge from Labour, and it's designed to fix what Labour is describing as fragmented and broken training systems in place. Well, in that speech today, Sir Keir argued that a new approach is needed to reduce the need for immigration across key sectors. Conservatives responded, though, saying that the plans to redirect cash could, in fact, cut the number of apprenticeships on offer. Meanwhile, the Conservative leadership race is gathering pace, with Shadow Work and Pensions Secretary Mel Stride, the latest Tory, to hint at a run at the top job. Speaking to GB News earlier on today, he was asked whether or not he'd stand.
I haven't ruled that out and I haven't ruled it in. We don't yet know what the contest holds. The party board is going to come forward shortly, I think, with the process, and I will finally take a decision at that time. Some colleagues have been speaking to me about that possibility, and it's something that I'm weighing up.
Hasn't ruled it out. Now, in Wales, the Health Minister, Eluned Morgan, has announced she's running to replace the outgoing First Minister, Vaughan Gething, who lasted just 4 months in the post. Baroness Morgan, seen here on the left of the picture if you're watching on television, will be standing on a joint unity ticket with Rural Affairs Minister Hugh Aronka-Davies, who would become Deputy First Minister. They've received a groundswell of support in Wales from across the Labour benches, including from Mr Gething's rival in the last leadership race, Jeremy Miles. And those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Polly Middlehurst. I'm back in an hour. See you then.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Welcome back to State of the Nation. Joseph Robinette Biden, the 46th President of the United States, has fallen out of the 2024 presidential election race. In doing so, the Democrat Party establishment has made a serious admission. Not only has it confessed what we knew to be true, that Biden is not mentally fit for office, but that he hasn't been fit for some time. The problem is that people voted for Joe Biden as president, and they got an anonymous blob that no one elected, which has manipulated an elderly and unwell man for some time. It is utter contempt for democracy, and a whole swathe of the left in America were complicit. The Democratic Party, its elected senators, its House Representatives, and the liberal media, institutions such as CNN or the New York Times, misled the American people. They told them that he was in good shape as ever, that he hadn't got the early onset of some form of dementia. They said it was all a right-wing plot to selectively show bits of film that made him look as if he was losing the plot. But now we know they have admitted that they lied to the American people. They took the electorate for fools. They proved Trump's point, that they didn't care about voters, the people Hillary Clinton memorably called deplorables. In that arrogance, they thought they could manipulate power through a man unfit for office. Here's a reminder of what the electorate repeatedly saw, but were repeatedly told not to question that they had got it wrong.
America is a nation that can be defined in a single word. I was in the foothills of the Himalayas with Xi Jinping. Percentage of women who registered to vote and cast a ballot is consistently higher than the percentage of the men who do so. End of quote. Repeat the line. And now I want to hand it over to the president of Ukraine, who has as much courage as he has determination. Ladies and gentlemen, President Putin.
This is actually sad. It's cruel that they have been making somebody who is not in good health pretend that he was, and embarrassing for him and for his family. But the good news is that there's a new hope on the horizon. A new candidate has emerged, one who has Biden's full endorsement, assuming he knows what he was endorsing. Someone known for her statesmanship, her masterful oratory abilities, and for her pristine record in public speaking, representing a stark contrast to her predecessor as a Democratic nominee. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Kamala Harris.
I think that, to be very honest with you, I do believe that we should have rightly believed, but we certainly believe that certain issues are just settled. No, that's right, and that's why I do believe that we are living, sadly, in real unsettled times. I can imagine what can be and be unburdened by what has been, you know? What can be unburdened by what has been? What can be unburdened by what has been?
Well, that's what the blob does. It lies to you and it keeps control in America and Britain and across the Western world. It does whatever it can to stay in power. You vote for a president and you get the blob. The presidential candidate is merely the puppet operated by people behind the scenes who nobody ever votes for. And it hates populism because populism is a threat to its own power. In the climax of George Orwell's 1984, the protagonist, Winston Smith, is forced not just to say but to believe that 2 + 2 = 5 by the totalitarian party, INGSOG. Winston Smith said that freedom is the freedom to say that 2 + 2 = 4. But in America, freedom is now the freedom to say that Joe Biden is not fit for office and has not been fit for some time. Freedom is the freedom to say that the American people have been lied to and that the liberal establishment is contemptuous of democracy. As ever, let me know your views, mailmog@gbnews.com. But I'm joined now by Richard Hanania, President of the Centre for the Study of Partisanship and Ideology. Thank you very much for joining me this evening. Doesn't this just show, well, it was a pleasure, that the American people have been misled and that there's been a terrible cover-up centred on the White House?
Yeah, I mean, I think that politicians don't always tell the truth, and spokesmen for politicians often don't tell the truth. I don't think that's news. As far as the larger cover-up, it really depends on who you are talking about or who you were reading. The New York Times, Ezra Klein, I mean, many months ago, basically said in a famous article that the man he said they're hiding him. It doesn't seem like he can do the job of at least running for president, if not being president. There was a lot of news reports that, he wasn't doing well. And of course, people in the Democratic Party thought they were stuck with him, and they sort of denied what people could see with their own eyes. And then we had the debate in the end of June, and it became clear, I think, to anyone with a functioning brain that they weren't going to be able to get him over the finish line. So yeah, I mean, I think what we have to see here is that there's a lot of different factions here that have different interests and different viewpoints on this thing.
But if they thought they could have got him over the finish line, they would have put forward to the American people somebody who was in some stage of senility.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on who you mean by they. If you mean the people in the White House who owe their entire careers to Biden and are going to be nothing without him, sure. Yeah, that seems like what they were trying to do. There were others in the Democratic Party who didn't like Biden and thought somebody else would be a stronger candidate. And so, yeah, I mean, we sort of saw this play out in real time, and we saw, what the battle lines were. And eventually, he came to the conclusion they were going to make his life very difficult if he stayed in any longer.
But who has been the president for the last 4 years if the president has not been capable of carrying out his office, which it seems clear that at least for some part of that time he hasn't been?
Yeah, I think that there has been a deterioration. I mean, I think 3 years ago, Biden clearly was not the man he was when he was Obama's vice president, but he was functional. You could imagine him getting up every day. He could have a meeting, he'd make a gaffe or something, but he knew where he was and he knew what he was saying, and he wasn't just trailing off. It seems like in the last couple months, particular, it's gotten really, really bad. And even he still has good days. I mean, I thought that his press conference at the end of the NATO summit, I thought it was okay. I mean, he flubbed, Vice President Trump.
Vice President Trump.
Putin. Yeah, exactly. So there were some embarrassing things, but he went back and forth on certain questions, and he was all there. And so yeah, I mean, I think that it's just been really concerning the last few months and these last couple months coming up here until January, whether he can do the job. I think that's become now a real question.
But in a democracy, don't people have a right to know who they're being governed by, and that if the person isn't capable of doing it, particularly an executive presidency of the type that the United States has, they're in a sense being defrauded because they think they voted for somebody, they think somebody's in charge, but actually for months or possibly even for longer, the man with his finger on the button potentially has not been up to the job.
Yeah, I mean, the Democratic theory, I mean, we could have these debates. I mean, he was elected in 2020. At some point, he wasn't the man who was elected at that point. I mean, I think that, the idea of whether this is Democratic or not, we've seen majority support among Democrats for him dropping out in the aftermath of the debate. So I think that it just has been, I think some will think of a deterioration. It's just a very sad situation. I mean, he wasn't this man 2 years ago. He wasn't this man 3 years ago. I mean, I think it just became sort of untenable just in time for everyone to say, hold on, we've got to do something else.
And as a final thought, wasn't it a rather cruel way to treat a distinguished public servant that Joe Biden's devoted his life to public service, whether you agree with him or not, and that actually to use him as a puppet as his mental faculties were so clearly declining in public was rather cruel?
Well, I don't know if I'd classify Biden as the victim here. I think that, to the extent that he is, still there and knows what he wants, I think he'd like to be president. I think he'd rather be president than be in a nursing home or something. I mean, he was the one hanging on longer than other people. So I wouldn't say he's the victim here. I mean, I think he, if it was up to him, he'd still be president for another 4 years. So, but it's not happening. So.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Richard. With me now is Alan Friedman, journalist and author of This Is Not America. Well, thank you for joining me. The title of your book, This Is Not America, seems to me a really opposite one. Surely America shouldn't have been ruled by somebody who was in the early stages of senility.
Well, surely the Democrats should have realized the state of Mr. Biden and the fact that he was either aging very rapidly or had some cognitive problems, not 3 weeks ago when he had a disastrous debate, but 6 months ago or a year ago. I don't know that he's been in this state for 3 or 4 years. I believe this has been a rapid deterioration in the last few months. But the Democrats are now having a kind of internal warfare. And you had the whole machinery of Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton immediately endorsing Kamala Harris, because that was their choice. And you had Barack Obama and Nancy Pelosi knifing Biden in the back every day, humiliating Biden, because that was their game. These are the warlords of the Democratic Party who got rid of Biden. The problem is Kamala Harris is less popular than Biden, and Donald Trump is more likely than not to win this election. I don't see Kamala turning this around.
And doesn't this all play into Donald Trump's narrative that there is an elite in Washington who don't care about democracy, who want to stitch it up for themselves? They don't care about having a president who isn't capable of carrying out the role because they want to keep power for themselves and they want to keep the, quote, deplorables in their place?
Well, if you asked me, Sir Jacob, to tell you who are the Trump voters, I would say of the 50% of Americans who will vote for Trump in November, I would say about 1/3 of them are what we could call the hillbillies, the real backwoodsmen, the real less educated people who follow populists and may follow conspiracy theories like QAnon. And then there's a whole group of normal suburban people who just vote Republican and may or may not like Trump, but want lower taxes and less regulation in society. And then there's a third group. It's true that Biden depended on the big pharmas and the big donors for his funding. There was dark money there. But it's also true that Jamie Dimon, the head of JP Morgan, has been approaching with his nose the posterior of Trump for months now. And he has been saying things that are very flattering, as if he's auditioning to be Secretary of the Treasury. And so there's a whole group of Wall Street people, call them cynics, call them market people, who just bet that if they want the Dow Jones average to burst through 50,000, they want to make more money in equities, they want to have less taxes and less regulations, then Trump is their man. So there's also that.
Well, the old slogan, what's good for General Motors is good for America. But this is not the first time in American history that a president has been unable to do it, that Woodrow Wilson was in this position, wasn't he? And that his wife became the intermediary for him and messages passed back and forth.
You're correct. Not only Woodrow Wilson, but Franklin Delano Roosevelt was in a wheelchair and was deeply ill for 18 months, and it was hidden from the American public that he couldn't stand up.
And do you think this is a greater problem with American democracy, that the presidents are so powerful and therefore the people around them are desperate to keep that power and take it for themselves when they're not the ones with the mandate?
Well, there's certainly a Washington class, which I wouldn't call the deep state. I would call a bunch of very clever political operatives and opportunists who flock to all these leaders and do exploit them for their own careers. And many of them go into government, then leave the White House, then set up a lobbying firm, and then start lobbying the next government. That's the way it works in Washington, the revolving door. It's not a deep state. It's more.
But this is playing into Trump's hands, really. That Kamala Harris not being that strong, and
it is. I think Trump will win because he's on a real wave right now. He's picked a very, very, I mean, I know, Sir Jacob, you were right-wing in politics, but trust me, J.D. Vance would make you look like a left-winger because he's really out there. And he says things that are quite,
thank you, Alan.
Quite wild.
That's a great... We're going to have to stop on that note. It's the first time I've been called a pinko, but thank you very much. Coming up, with 75,000 passengers affected by the global IT meltdown this weekend, could new evidence suggest it was none other than the European Union that caused the chaos?
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
King Charles has launched his own aftershave, costing, wait for it, an eye-watering 135 quid for a 100 millilitre bottle, promising buyers that they can smell just like the gardens of his Highgrove country pile. Now, this is something that Meghan Markle would do, surely not the King. Is this a case of King Charles selling out, watering down the brand just like Meghan? Well, join me now to discuss this is the royal broadcaster Helena Chard. Helena, welcome to the show.
Martin,
often on this show, we've had a pop at Meghan Markle, the Sussexers, for selling out, for flogging strawberry jam, and now the King is flogging Pong. Is this really the right royal thing to do?
Do you know what? So the joy of a luxury Highgrove splash, you know. At the end of the day, Highgrove is such a special place, and the Highgrove shop sells amazing things on there. And as we know, the profit actually goes towards charity. So it's the King's Foundation, which was formed in 1986. Profits go towards educational and training, and it's all to do with this sort of sustainable world. But not to forget as well the charitable aspect and the whole ethos of the King's Foundation, and that's so important. This is not just something that's going up on the website and just being sold purely to go into someone's pocket. So I think, you know, all in all, I think everyone should have a look at the Highgrove website and see what's on for sale. I mean, there are lots of really lovely, I think pretty fairly priced products, and even more so, go and see the gardens. You know, as we know, King Charles is a keen environmentalist, and the gardens are fabulous.
GB News, the People's Channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking, this is a nightmare for the Conservatives again. Down to earth. It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it? And most importantly, honest. Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them. They catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akweer, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
It's true. You're not wrong. No one will be cancelled. Lovely.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
Well, welcome back. I'm still Jacob Rees-Mogg, and we've been talking about Biden, Harris, and your mailmogs have been steaming in. Peter makes a really important point. He says, when is anybody going to mention that our PM said Biden was absolutely fine only days ago? He said he was on good form, which I wondered whether there was an interesting degree of imprecision about the mental state of somebody who's on good form. John says, why can't we just admit Biden is ill? The left then always has to bring in Trump, who's obviously as sharp as attack. As sharp on attack as well as ATAC. 8.5 billion people around the world were affected by the Microsoft security outage on Friday. Swathes of workers opened up their computers to the blue screen of death. Many took it upon themselves to bunk off work. Obviously, GB News viewers would resort to the typewriter and handwritten notes, mine on parchment. But the same can't be said for goat milk drinking Guardian readers, I digress. Now, many issues can be related back to the European Union. One example allegedly being this IT outage. It has been reported Microsoft has blamed the EU for the outage after it was made to sign a 2009 contract preventing it from making security changes. Well, I'm joined now by Chairman and CEO of the Cyber Security Association, Chris Windley. Chris, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you very much for inviting me. Great to be here.
Thank you. Do you think Microsoft is just passing the buck, or do you think they've got a real point?
I'll tell you what I think. Microsoft are very upset at the amount of money that these companies have made over the years, Jacob, right? Companies like CrowdStrike and SentinelOne and Qualys during the COVID period had huge valuations. Some of them that went from $1 billion to $10 billion. So they stole a very lucrative bit of business that Microsoft might have had, Jacob.
OK, and do you think that Microsoft, if it had kept the code internally, would have avoided this problem? Because obviously Apple and Google have kept this type of code internally.
Well, I tell you what I do agree with, right? I mean, obviously, the stuff that we're doing at the minute is extremely complex, isn't it? Right? And we've got lots of moving parts and there's lots of opportunity for things to go wrong, right? So I get that, definitely you can understand, right? The less players that there are in the mix and that, the less complication there is to a large extent. I definitely agree with that, Jacob.
And I wonder if the European Union was naive and failed really to understand the market when it made this requirement of Microsoft, because actually Apple developed and Google developed and other competitors have come in to a fast-growing, developing market in a way that Microsoft at one point seemed so dominant that it looked unlikely it would happen.
Well, and I think the other point there as well, Jacob, is they haven't done the same to Google and Apple that they did to Microsoft, right? And I do actually agree, that they could have been a bit heavy-handed. I mean, obviously, they won't understand the complexity of this and the implications of it, will they? So I do actually agree with that, that they probably were a bit heavy-handed.
Well, I always thought it was a slightly anti-American approach, that this is a great American company. We're the European Union. We don't have a proper European competitor. Let's see if we can bash the US. And that it came out of envy and has come back and damaged a lot of European consumers.
Yeah, I mean, well, of course, in America, they themselves have pursued Microsoft over various things and that. I don't think to the extent I'm not an expert, but from to the extent that the EU have pursued them, right? But, they've been pursued in America as well on this basis, haven't they? I think one of the interesting things here is you sort of say, because really it's CrowdStrike issue, or largely a CrowdStrike issue and you sort of say, is this a security or a cybersecurity or a software issue? It's a very interesting question.
And it's slightly unfortunate that it's called CrowdStrike, isn't it? Because they ended up striking the crowd, which may mean they should change their name.
Yeah, it's also slightly unfortunate that they one of their customers is the Department of Defense as well. But still, yeah.
Indeed, yes. Well, let's hope Putin hasn't been tuning in to get the latest news on CrowdStrike. Thank you very much, Chris. Well, I'm joined now by my distinguished panel of former Conservative MP Philip Davis and the author and broadcaster Amy Nicole Turner. Amy, this is the EU. Didn't really understand computing, still thought we should be using the abacus, came in with heavy-handed regulation and bungled. And aren't we lucky to be out of it?
I don't know. I feel like this topic is giving bendy bananas. Do you remember when you tried to blame the EU for curvature?
It was true, that regulation existed.
All right. Well, then it's worse than bendy bananas.
It's worse than bendy bananas.
Right. So the way I could understand this is basically they insisted that 2 people have a pair of the keys to this software. And it's much better and less risky, surely, for there to be 2 pairs of keys, because if you lose one, you're really in trouble.
I don't think it is, because it's a very complex integrated system. And if you extract a bit out of it, then you have somebody who can put in an error, whereas if it were under Microsoft's control, there would have been much greater protections.
But that's the point I'm making. It's better to have it outside of Microsoft additionally, because if something goes wrong, you want to have 2 ways into it. That's as far as I understand it, but it's very tricky, I have to say.
I'm impressed, Jacob, at your technical knowledge here, to be perfectly honest. I always had you penciled in as a Luddite, to be perfectly honest. I've been overwhelmed by your knowledge on technology. Look, you wouldn't have to work hard to persuade me that the EU were to blame for anything, to be perfectly honest, and particularly this. And I suspect it was a load of meddlesome bureaucrats wanting to stick their nose into things without really knowing what they were doing. But I don't think we should just let Microsoft off the hook here, because I'd have had more sympathy if Microsoft were on every day on the media saying these EU rules are going to lead to a catastrophe. And to the best of my knowledge, I can't remember hearing this from Microsoft every 5 minutes. It seems to be being wise after the event. So I'll blame the EU all day long, but I think Microsoft should take their fair share.
To be fair to Microsoft, they had a long battle with the Commission over this antitrust monopolistic investigation, and they were very critical of what the EU was doing at that point. They certainly didn't help us in 2016, but big corporations are like that. Amy, sorry.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, I think it's a really interesting point that only 1% of the Microsoft systems went down. Can you imagine? Imagine if it was 100%. Yeah. It just shows how much we depend on this stuff. And I think surely the real problem here was that we didn't have backup, rather than who to blame.
But how much backup can you have? How realistic does that become? If you back up every system, your costs balloon, and all of that has to be passed on to consumers. What level of risk do you take?
I honestly, I find this incredibly uninspiring, this story, I have to say. But I tried to get on board with it as much as possible, and it just seems to make sense to me to have a bit more of an insurance policy around these things than what we've got.
So if you've got cash,
exactly. This shows the folly of this cashless society that we're trying to foist on people, and all this digital banking.
You can't fly planes by carrying cash. No, there was more to it than that.
But people, it's interfering with people's lives in a way, and people should be trusted to run their own life. They shouldn't be forced down a particular route when the technology clearly can't be trusted to do it. So, it does show the folly of going down a cashless society route.
And people going to supermarkets couldn't pay for their food if they were trying to do it in a cashless way, whereas if they took notes out of their wallet, they could pay.
Again, though, I don't think that all the things that went wrong that day could be solved by...
All the fault of the EU.
So
the EU meant people couldn't eat. They couldn't buy their food.
You too. It's all the EU's fault.
Well, on this occasion...
It's a good place to start. It's always a good place to start.
It's always the EU's fault. It's everything.
Well, I think the EU's banged to rights here, in spite of the noble efforts of Amy to defend them. Thank you to my panel. Next, is the higher education system at risk of meltdown as the university Ponzi scheme teeters on the brink of collapse?
Good evening. Here's your latest GB News weather forecast coming to you from the Met Office. For many, tomorrow looks like it's going to be a bit drier and a bit sunnier with that too. That being said, there will be some showery rain around. Most of today's showers are clearing away towards the east as we go overnight, but there is another system coming into the west and the southwest, and we are going to see further outbreaks of rain, which could be heavy, pushing across parts of Wales and also southwest England as we go overnight. Elsewhere, apart from a few showers towards the east-northeast, it's going to be largely dry, and there will be some clear skies around, but for many, another warm night. Temperatures, particularly in the towns and cities, holding up in the mid-teens Celsius. Some outbreaks of rain then first thing could be quite heavy across some southern parts first of all, originally around central southern parts, but the heavier bursts are going to push their way eastwards through the morning before clearing away. Elsewhere across much of England and Wales, a few showery bursts, but also some decent bright sunny weather first thing. Largely fine and sunny across across Northern Ireland and many parts of Northern England. Across Scotland, a bit of a west-east split. Around eastern areas, it's going to be a bit cloudier, a few outbreaks of rain here, likely to be drier, brighter across more central and western parts of Scotland. Through the day, then, we are going to see a scattering of showers here or there. Many places will actually avoid the showers and stay largely dry, but a few showers are possible and they could be a little bit on the heavy side, though I'm not expecting any thunder like we've seen through today. With a bit more sunshine around, temperatures are going to be a bit higher than they have been lately. Temperatures reaching highs of around 24, 25 Celsius, possibly even 26 Celsius. Any showers will die out as we go through tomorrow night into Wednesday, and Wednesday looks like it will start mostly dry. We can expect some showery rain pushing its way through across parts of Scotland and perhaps some showers kicking off over eastern parts of England, but elsewhere it's looking largely fine yet again before some very wet weather pushes in, particularly across southern parts as we go through Thursday. See you later.
Tune in to Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. GB News royalty with your perfect start to the weekend. Lucky us. Feisty and fearless guests.
Well, I'm a normal person, so ask me.
Honest opinions that raises more questions than a Gary Barlow tax return. And a few surprises along the way. Might be cold in this studio. That is Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan. 8 to 9 only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Patrick Christie's. Every weeknight from 9, I bring you 2 hours of unmissable, explosive debate and headline-grabbing interviews. What impact has that had?
We got death threats and the bomb threat and so on.
As time passes, she could have said storm.
You made my argument for me. My guests and I tackle the issues that really matter with a sharp take on every story.
Went everywhere.
Something practical could be done.
Or I can become something different. Patrick Christie's tonight from 9 p.m. only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Well, we've been discussing the incompetence of the European Union and its generally disastrous behaviour, and the mail logs have come in. Mick says, "Dear Jacob, it comes as no surprise to hear that the EU was the cause of the computer chaos. The EU is also to blame for the flood of immigrants crossing the Med, one of the most undemocratic, dysfunctional organisations ever known. Sir Keir Starmer wants to cosy up to them, which seems entirely appropriate for a Labour government. I have a feeling the EU is also responsible for Adam and Eve having to leave the Garden of Eden and for various other things that have happened in our history that have been most disappointing. A recent report has found that numerous universities around the UK are facing serious financial woes. It's been revealed that 40% of universities will run budget deficits this year. To survive the squeeze, certain courses have had to be cut, with fewer students now able, the poor dears, to study such degrees as golf studies, photography, and models in Harry Styles, though I think this must be a misprint of hairstyles. However, how would our economy cope? Is it time for universities to concentrate upon proper education and the real courses that will equip the next generation with the right skills? Mickey Mouse degrees and excess staff who bloat the public sector need to be fired, then so be it. Well, I'm joined by a highly intellectual panel this evening, with former Conservative MP Philip Davies and the author and broadcaster Amy Nicole Turner. Now, Philip, had the Tories won, we were going to get rid of Mickey Mouse degrees. Is this going to happen by market forces instead?
Yeah, look, this is Rishi Sunak got this absolutely right when he said at the start of the year that universities had been selling immigration rather than education and were basically too reliant on people coming in, bringing their family members in. And, of course, he's been proved right because what happened is the government in January stopped people being able to bring dependents in for their studies, and the number of people coming on courses has gone through the floor. If they were coming just for the benefit of the course, they still would be coming. But they weren't coming for the course, they were coming because it was an avenue to get their family into the country. And I've got no sympathy for the universities in this regard. Bradford University complained to me about the devastating impact this was having on their finances. But if they had sold education and the merits of the course, rather than saying this is a good way of getting your family members in, they wouldn't be in the mess they're in now.
Isn't this right, Amy, that the universities, particularly the weaker universities, simply earned their money by selling a visa route into the UK?
I'm glad you brought that up, because I think what the government can do, because I know they're separate, but the government does have a role. So they've impacted the numbers of tuition fees through international students by last year, cutting back on the number of dependents that international students can bring. So if we want to save this sector, which contributes massively to local economy, national economy, is it overall good for everyone, then they need to step in and remove the cap on dependents and remind international students that they are more than welcome, or if they can't do that, underrate the cost.
But actually, this isn't good if it's providing people domestically with bad courses, that they leave with tens of thousands of pounds worth of debt for a course that no employer thinks is valuable, and they get jobs that don't pay them enough to pay back the debt. What is the point of this? This is just a huge debt overhang on the economy.
It remains the case that you're still more likely to earn more than if you didn't go to university. When you look at the statistics overall, high earners will subsidise those who end up not paying off their fee, and you tend to measure success on the monetary capital, whereas I would look at it overall and look at the non-monetary benefits.
But I don't actually.
Of which there are loads. Your salary doesn't determine whether it's worth going to university or not. There are plenty of people that earn.
OK, but it is worth going to university to do a proper degree. It is not worth going to university to do a golf course. A proper degree. See, economics, history, business studies, chemistry, engineering.
I think everyone should have
things that expand people's mind or have an economic benefit.
But everyone should have the opportunity if they want to go to university. I mean, if I want to compete in the 100 metres final at the Olympics, if I want to do that,
well, you're not qualified, Philip.
No, and that's the whole point. Lots of these people who go do their A-levels, fail their A-levels and still get the opportunity to go on a university degree course, because everyone has this view that I've got a right to go to university.
Yeah.
You've got it the wrong way around, I'm afraid, Amy. What's happening is that people who should be going to university are being deterred because of the cost, because they're having to, in effect, subsidise the ones who shouldn't be going to university. What we should be having is a system where there should be far fewer people going to university. We want the best people to go to university, and I'd be quite happy for them to go and not pay any tuition fees for the best people to go. The people who get the best A-level results to go to university. They should not be subsidising people who have not qualified to go to university, and that's what's happening at the moment.
But we live longer than we ever have lived. I like the idea, as many young people do, of deferring adulthood in a most productive way that not only benefits you as an individual, but benefits the local economy. You talk about Bradford University. I bet Bradford as a whole absolutely benefits from having that university in that town. It provides jobs, it provides opportunities, it provides innovation, research.
But you don't...
As a whole...
But it's like a nursery for people just to sit at while because they don't fancy going out to work just yet.
But you don't.
Skills that you learn when you're doing a degree.
You don't benefit. You don't benefit the economy in the long term by building it on a pile of debt, because debt ultimately has to be repaid, and it's either public debt or private debt.
But you're taking those tiny individual students. If you look at it, if you pan out and look at it holistically,
you've got billions of pounds worth of debt, all of which has to be repaid.
But do you not think that at the moment we're charging 9% tax for your whole working life for the privilege of going to university? That's wrong. The government needs to step in and help these institutions to survive because of the points that I've made.
It's the taxpayers stepping in. It's not the government.
Because of what universities do for society as a whole.
No, I don't. Bad in universities go bankrupt. Yeah. But it's a commercial thing. Can you attract people? And where I really disagree with you is in selling visas. Because, to Philip's point, if you're selling a good education, then people will come regardless of the visa situation. If you're just doing it for visas, you offer people bad subjects because you're milking it for the wrong purpose. And that will be bad for the domestic students because their courses will be designed for visas.
Not, though. I think they make the economy into the billions, international students.
Why do people not want to come for the course, though? Why, now they've stopped dependents coming. If this is so valuable, why have these students stopped coming to the UK simply because we've stopped dependents being able to come with them?
But a lot of those people were doing postgraduate courses, say a student from India.
You can still bring dependents with postgraduate courses. It's undergraduate courses they've been stopped.
However, if it is a net benefit to the economy, why question it?
Well, who says that it is?
The money that international students bring in, I think it's 28 billion.
Well, no, but the earnings that they bring in are not that important,
average,
actually.
After 2 years.
And we went through the figures on this a few weeks ago, and actually their economic contribution is pretty marginal.
It is
because they don't add to GDP per capita.
I don't think that is the case. If you look at the contribution to the economy...
It is because some of the people they're bringing in are purely non-earners, so just adding to the per capita without any income attached to it.
As somebody that went to university, you went to university. Philip, did you go to university?
I did.
We all went to university. We've all benefited. So why are we going to pull up the ladder now to more people going to university?
All right. Well, we've given Amy the last word twice. It's a record. Thank you to my panel. Coming up, the Albert Memorial. Why does this glorious extravaganza of high Victorian art face attack from the woke mob? Wet wipe of the week may be coming up shortly.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
It was also announced that the Prince of Wales is set to star in a new two-part documentary on ITV covering his mission to try and eradicate homelessness.
Well, let's talk about this and much, much more with Angela Levin, royal biographer, who joins us in the studio. I'm glad to hear that this documentary's been made, Angela, because I worried that he made this big announcement about homelessness, and I thought, goodness me, here is somebody who could maybe do something about this. And then it's all seemed to have gone quiet.
He's been very busy with it, actually. He's gone all over the country to see different areas and how they have been, and to try and change people's attitude to homelessness, that they're people who need help and want to get back into a normal life, and he's there to do it. I mean, we mustn't forget that in, I think it was 2009, he slept out in the street to see for himself what it was like, and he also helped people who are selling the magazine.
Big Issue, no?
Yes, the Big Issue. And he's worked all day long with the same man twice now. So I think he was actually just covering the basic about what it was like for him and how he can now help other people. He and Catherine are putting £3 million straight away into that. And it's going to
Where
be...
does that money come from?
Their own foundation, you know.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so they're not taking it from our tax or anybody else's, you know. And there will be a lot more. And he's been getting the money to do this. And I think it's he wants to do this so badly because of his mother. You know, she took them to see people who were homeless.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry, Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Mark Dolan tonight is your weekend dose of news, debate and entertainment. This sounds like a wild conspiracy theory. Don't miss My Big Opinion, Mark Meets, and My Take at 10. Democracy is a funny old thing. And we don't do boring, not on my watch. I just won't have it. Go and get another glass of that bubbly, you've earned it. That's Mark Dolan tonight, Saturday and Sunday, 9 to 11, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, we were talking about universities and immigration, and the mail mogs have come in. David says, not only wastes money, but wastes 3 years of young people's lives. You are a harsh man, David. And a GB viewer says, an anonymous GB viewer says, Jacob, your government, not mine, it's His Majesty's, but never mind, could and should have sorted this out when you were in power. I can't believe students are allowed to bring all their families. We did. Rishi Sunak limited the number of dependents that could be brought. In the latest attempt to whitewash our history, the Royal Parks has stated on its website that the Albert Memorial, situated in Hyde Park, is deemed to be offensive. The magnificent structure designed by Gilbert Scott as a memorial to Queen Victoria's husband is a tourist favourite and represents Britain at the high watermark of its history and power. It seems, though, that we have an early contender for Wet Wipe of the Week, as the website decries its supposed racial stereotypes. The memorial features 4 statues showing the people and animals of each of the continents, despite Europeans also being among the people depicted in traditional clothing. There was no picture of me in a tailcoat and a top hat, I'm sorry to say. The structure has stood for over 150 years and been a symbol of national achievement since. When will these lefty loonies get a grip, drop the hair shirt and take some pride in our and their glorious history? Well, I'm joined now by historian Oliver Webb-Carter. Oliver, thank you so much for coming in. surely people know that this statue was put up at a time when people thought different things, and they don't need to be fed this pap by the royal palaces.
Yes, I was looking through their website to try and find the direct quote that was mentioned in the LBC and Telegraph report, and I couldn't find those words, which I have to say looked like they were written by a work experience person. However, I did find another part of the website that was lauding the structure, describing it as the height of Victorian achievement. So I think the royal parks have probably one hand doesn't know what the other hand's doing here.
And it is a magnificent memorial, and Queen Victoria has a huge personal interest in it, because obviously she was in mourning for such a long time and wanted this appreciation of her husband, who was a very remarkable man.
Yes, although what I would say is that if a memorial were to be constructed today, I doubt it would be in the same kind of style. I think some of those structures are, I hate that word problematic, but I think if it were done today in 2024, which of course it wasn't, it was you know, as we all know, more than 100 years ago, it's different. It's of its time, but it's still a stunning structure.
And isn't that true of all the buildings, not just in the United Kingdom? So the great cathedrals have pictures of devils on them, which are not a way that we depict the next world. That every building is inevitably of its time. No one would put on the roof of Westminster Hall supported by angels nowadays, more's the pity. But people did what they thought was right and believed at that time. And that's part of our history and part of the interest of the buildings. It's not something to apologise for.
That's right. I think the Victorian era is fascinating. As you mentioned in the introduction, that it was the high watermark of the empire. That said, the empire had... there are within a few years, we had the disaster of the Zulu War, and, you know, a little bit later, the Boer War, and we know about concentration camps in the Boer War. So the Victorian era, whilst it was hugely, it was the zenith, the height of power for Britain. We can't be proud of everything within that.
No, the camps in the Boer War were designed to save people. And they were affected very badly by disease. I think...
More than 24,000 people were killed in those camps.
Absolutely, but they died primarily of measels.
Disease,
and
yes. When you pack people into a
absolutely,
camp.
But it was trying to save them because of their families were away fighting and they weren't being fed. It wasn't like... It gets confused with the German concentration camps, which were deliberate killing places. And it's the use of the word that is, you're absolutely accurate, but that it gives, I think, a very misleading impression of what the aim of those camps was.
Well, the result was...
The result was a death rate equivalent to the tenements in Glasgow of the period.
I don't think that's something to say.
No, it's not. But it needs contextualising, and this is always the point of history, isn't it? That it needs contextualising.
That is certainly true, and I think we're probably quite grateful for the welfare state that was able to bring those tenements out of poverty.
Absolutely. And actually, Disraeli's Artisan Dwellings Act, which is 15 years after the Albert Memorial.
You've brought something up that I wasn't aware of, Jacob.
Which is really important. It's the first effort to improve housing condition. And actually the Liberals were opposed to it because they thought it was an interference in the free market. And Disraeli, a good Tory, was much more concerned with what his policies did rather than with the theology of it.
Yes, well, Disraeli, the great Conservative Prime Minister, didn't even know about, I mentioned the Zulu War before, didn't even know about the crossover into Zululand in 1879.
Because communications were poor and things didn't...
I think it was cooked up by two colonial administrators in South Africa knowing that the communications were not up to scratch.
And actually the same is true with Gordon, who deliberately ignores the orders that he's given by Gladstone, nonetheless Gordon, great hero, and the Boer War, which is a huge extension of what the domestic power wanted at the time.
Yes, the Boer War is a very interesting war, a particularly nasty one, actually, costing the British Empire a vast amount of money. Similar to the Albert Memorial. I was surprised to learn that the memorial cost £100,000 in 1870.
And it's one of the reasons, this cost, that Queen Victoria and Gladstone fell out so much, because they need a little bit more gunmetal for it. And Gladstone refuses to pay for it. And Queen Victoria is absolutely furious. So part of the reason Victoria hates Gladstone is because he was mean over the Albert Memorial, and she never forgives him.
It's interesting. Do you think we understand the Albert and Victoria relationship enough, though? Because there is an argument that Albert was very busy making sure that Victoria was pregnant the whole time, 9 children, as we know, enabling him to do what he wanted to do, and in a way dismissing Victoria.
I think that's almost certainly true. I also think he was very meddlesome, and that British Prime Ministers would have got very fed up with it had he lived a full life, and that Gladstone liked him, but Palmerston could not stand him, and he hated Palmerston in return. So I think the Victorian settlement, I've run out of time. The Victorian settlement would have been very different had Albert lived. You must come back on to talk about that. I've talked too much. Thank you, Oliver. Anyway, up next, it's Patrick Christie's. Patrick, what's on your bill of fare this evening?
Well, I've got loads on, actually, Jacob. Should we pay benefits to people who are desperate to have more kids? I'm not sure we should. If that Cooper wants to deport illegal nail bar and car wash workers, will they actually have the bottle to do that? What about the migrant hotels? Has Labour lied to us all about the amount of tax that we're going to have to pay? And also, the mother of a Just Stop Oil criminal has been filmed whinging about the fact her daughter will now miss her brother's wedding because she's been sent to prison. Well, that's a shame, because some people miss cancer appointments because of what she did on the M25. So we're going to have rather a lot to go at tonight, Jacob. We're kick-starting the week with a bang.
Well, that's going to be a very interesting programme. The Just Stop Oil people need to recognise that if you ignore democracy and if you break the law, you can't get away with it for free. It's just like the people who rioted on the 6th of January after Donald Trump had lost the election. Anyway, that's going to be all after the weather. I'm back tomorrow at 8 o'clock. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg. This has been State of the Nation. And the weather in Somerset, particularly in West Hertfordshire tomorrow, glorious. Perfect for taking Daisy for a walk. Also, I'm told.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good evening. Here's your latest GB News weather forecast coming to you from the Met Office. For many, tomorrow looks like it's going to be a bit drier and a bit sunnier with that too. That being said, there will be some showery rain around. Most of today's showers are clearing away towards the east as we go overnight, but there is another system coming into the west and the southwest, and we are going to see further outbreaks of rain, which could be heavy, pushing across parts of Wales and also southwest England as we go overnight. Elsewhere, apart from a few showers towards the east-northeast, it's going to be largely dry, and there will be some clear skies around, but for many, another warm night. Temperatures, particularly in the towns and cities, holding up in the mid-teens Celsius. Some outbreaks of rain then first thing could be quite heavy across some southern parts first of all, originally around central southern parts, but the heavier bursts are going to push their way eastwards through the morning before clearing away. Elsewhere across much of England and Wales, a few showery bursts, but also some decent bright sunny weather first thing. Largely fine and sunny across Northern Ireland and many parts of northern England. Across Scotland, a bit of a west-east split. Around eastern areas, it's going to be